welcome to your training about the methodology and to complement the way that we should act in the classroom. This course is a continuation of a previous one that we did that mentioned English as a second language method in depth. Okay, guys? During this course, we are going to talk about certain items that we taught on that previous course, and we are going to introduce some new ones. Okay. We are also going to talk about a very peculiar attitude that we have here at Speed Up, which is some key questions that you should ask yourself every time you're going to look at the class you're going to present. Okay. So the first thing we are going to remember from the previous course was the Mudley factor. Do you guys remember this? Does anyone remember? The Mudley factor just states that in the Speed Up classroom, the teacher should mirror himself as a bit of a mother talking to a child. So that experience of the student going like, good, yes, no, and you go, yeah, that's it, really good, I understood. Because we kind of get most of the things within the context. And having that very severe attitude of, cutting the student off and correcting the student way too fast and making the student feel like he's not being able to communicate is not an advantage most of the time. So we should have that motherly factor in us, especially on the first few lessons, that the student does a sentence which is very close to being impossible to be understood, but we can still get the idea, we still get the notion, and we start working through that because the student needs a ground zero. And independent of where that ground zero for the student is, we work with it, okay? From the previous course, we had like a small video, didn't we? Of a child learning how to say the first word in a minute. And it's just the mother repeating the same word over and over again with the intention. So the mother was able to connect the sound with the visual image that the baby had, and the baby wanted that visual image, so he repeated that sound. He connected that mental image to that sound and represented it. And that's what we do here. Obviously, because we work with grown-ups, it becomes faster, it becomes a lot quicker, and a lot more complex. But it's still the same principle, the Mudley factor still works. Okay? And also very important, the Mudley factor states that we should be with a proper demand from the student. So we should be able to get the most out of the student, but adequate where he is at the moment. So guys, on lesson 1, the student is supposed to describe people. Get them to describe people. But don't make them say that that person works from 8 to 9. Because that's just way beyond what he already knows. But make sure that you can get the most out of him. Okay? Most of the times it just works with a smile. You're being demanded with a smile on your face. So the student gets like looking at you, you bastard, and you're still smiling. So you're able to take the most out of the student, sometimes just with a smile. But be sure to ask that very key question of that lesson. Lesson 1 is please describe or who is. So don't run away from it, because the student needs to be able to be in the condition that demands the use of that vocabulary. Okay? So no issues, kind of remember that part. This is the quickest part. Okay? Saying this, we also go to the fact of when you're talking to a student, most of the times, or the majority of the times, we can understand what the student is saying because our domain over the language is much higher than his, and we already know the context we are working with, so we kind of deduct what he wants to tell us. We normally, or 99.9% of the times, we speak the same language as the student. So we basically know the cognate words that he uses. So kind of works in our advantage. But you have to ask yourself, does the student understand me? This is really important. sometimes it's not just the level of English that you use, but also the way that you speak. Okay, the lower the level of the student, the more expressive you need to be, the more the slower you need to be, and most of the times you need to impose intonation more often than you normally do in a normal conversation. So when you start getting into the student and getting into the lesson, you should use techniques like, for example, you're giving a lesson 12 and you're focusing on was and were, and you want to focus on that word in particular, that vocabulary. So it's normal to be able to present that vocabulary in a very visual way. So, where were you yesterday? You see the intonation of the question. Where were you? You express the word. And the yesterday to represent the time. In a normal conversation, that just sounds silly. But in a lesson, that's the tools that we have available to us to get the student to understand what you're saying, to be able to use it, and then little by little you start taking away that over-expressive attitude that we have. I know that sometimes it's a bit hard. We can finish a lesson in 20 minutes after we're still doing this. Okay, we're all Italian. But still is important within the classroom to be able to do that. Okay, so make sure that the student understands you. Also, besides being expressive, we also have to be very clear on our English. And this I mentioned especially on the first and second book. Accents and phonetic expressions that we might have personally have to be put aside within the first books, okay? First lesson, yes, contractions, everything. It's very easy to explain a negative form of the verb to be when you say, you are not at home. See, because it's even closer grammatically to the expression of Portuguese, that you represent a negative action with a different word, than it is just to contract everything. Obviously, by the end of the class, we want the student to go like, he isn't a bus driver. But if you start from he is not, it's a valid way, and it expresses negative. Like the same way that the do and doesn't. Okay? It's very important for you guys to be able to also get that very clear way of speaking within the first books. Through feedback from the students, we have heard multiple times students saying that certain teachers are more difficult to understand than others. And most of the time it's not because the level of the teacher or the level of English of the teacher is worse than the other ones. It's just because he's not willing to go to that point of getting that goo goo da da English out of him and go like, I am a teacher. And if you have to go that way, just go there, okay? And if there's also teachers that sometimes have a voice like this, and they speak, you know, they look like they're talking to inside their mouths. Guys, for 50 minutes you're gonna have to put your voice out. That's just it. It's the most efficient way for you to be the best teacher ever. Okay, your goal in the classroom is to get the student to be able to achieve all these goals, and if you have to go a bit against your personality in certain points, or a bit of your common habits of speaking into a certain point for 50 minutes, that's what you'll have to do to be the best teacher ever. Okay, guys? So truly make sure that you are able to be understood by the student. A big part of this is the level of English you use. And this picture just shows precisely what I'm saying, okay? Students on book 1, lesson 1, here, Okay, then you go, next class is a lesson 17, you go to 30% of English. And if, for example, if on lesson 17 we have already, yet, just, and lesson 18 we have, what we have?
Past perfect. Had. To action.
Two actions in the past in one sentence. Guys, you can't use it on lesson 17, you just can't, that's it, that's out of the question. Okay? Because of obvious reasons, the student hasn't heard it yet, so he won't understand it. You're going to have to stop your lesson and explain something that he's going to learn in the future. There's a very high likelihood that he will get confused. There's also the very high likelihood that you're going to get embarrassed by not understanding you. Okay? One thing is to present a word, a vocabulary, an expression within the lesson that the student is hearing it for the first time, but it's quick to explain. That's vocabulary, you can get away with it. But using structures, times of verbs, and grammar topics that were supposed to be given in 50 minutes and supposed to be done after the student has about 7 days of mnemonics, which is exposition to the audio. Without having all that, it's counterproductive, isn't it? We need to have a critical attitude towards that. Saying this, God, we're human. Sometimes it happens on book 1, you start your class with, how was your week? All of a sudden you go, oh Jesus, yes, no, not there yet. And you pull away from it. That's not an issue, because we're human beings. The problem is when you do it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you keep on doing it. When you're giving a lesson 5 and you're saying, what are you doing now? Oh, it's the first time the student is actually doing a negative action. You're already going into a past continuous action, which is at the moment. See how complicated it gets when we jump over the several steps that the student needs to go through. Okay? Also, when you use your correct level of communication, it's also very important for you guys to remember that that doesn't mean that your conversation is going to be short. The student could be brilliant, but we are always much better than the student. Always. Hasn't been one student that I had for the whole period of my career as a teacher that I could say, oh, the guy is way better than me. I could still get something, new into the conversation. Even in a very advanced level, you can still overcomplicate your lesson if you have to. Just to make sure that you can get the student to use the 50 minutes adequate that it was supposed to have on that lesson, okay? So extend the level of difficulty until the point that you see that the student is getting the right stimulus of the lesson, okay? Okay, guys? So don't think just because you're doing a book 1, lesson 1, and you can only use the verb to be, that's going to be a short lesson. No, it's going to be the same amount of time that you're going to use on that like you would use on phrasal verbs. And if we had like 4 or 5 hours to do phrasal verbs, we could probably do 4 or 5 hours of phrasal verbs because there are millions of them. The same way that if we really wanted to do a 4-hour lesson of verb to be, we could probably do it. Because look, we normally focus on, and this is just an example for you to understand how it just grows. Normally when you do lesson 1, we focus on 4 topics, or 4 or 5. So name, occupation, nationality, origin, and qualities. But we can also talk about present locations. If we have time. So what's your location at the moment? Oh, I'm at Speed Up, and your mother? Oh, she's at we can extend the use of the vocabulary more and more. And I can give you 2 or more examples that we could still use the verb to be in a different context. Why don't we do it sometimes on lesson 1? First reason is because we only have 50 minutes, and we can only do as much as we can in 50 minutes. And because the choice of context should be by priority, what you use the most. Okay, guys? So that's why, for example, on our lesson 21, when we do clauses, conditional clauses, we use if, and we don't use when, or we don't focus along on when, and we don't focus along on would. Why? Because statistically, everyone is a lot more likely to use the conditional if to represent that notion. So we focus our 50 minutes on if. Okay, guys, so that's basically how it works. Okay? This is, again, not much of a new thing for most of you. The next one, we're starting to going into the new part that we are presenting today, which is how is an English as a second language class supposed to be like? And this is all about communicating, okay? Talking, exchanging information, okay? The class should be run by a very precise guideline, which is a communication purpose class. This is our method of teaching. This is a complement of English as a second language. And this states that our main intention is to get the student to speak to us. We want the student to feel the urge and the necessity to tell us something. Okay? Now, this is an advancement on a lot of other courses which do mechanical repetitions. A lot of other courses that are basically our competition don't want to go into that point of making the student talking to you. They just go and they give you a line to repeat 3 million times, and then they give you another line. And they expect that eventually, because you repeated that quantity of times, that sentence, you'll be able to personalize it in your own life. And they forget that sometimes actors also do plays of 1 hour and something, and it's nothing to do with their lives. See the idea, how it works? This is a bit of an evolution for teaching. I'm not saying this is going to be easy, but this should be our goal. Okay? So always consider that your class environment should be to get the student to pass on information to you. Okay? And it always should be with a division of students talking time and teachers talking time. Teachers talking time should be 75 to 25%. TTT, which is STT, students talking time, should be 75%. And TTT, teachers talking time, should be just 25%. Make your time worth. Do very precise questions. Do a question that will be your following question. So, for example, you want the student to answer you a question of how long. Go into the in-depth life of the student. So, what recent activities have you done? Oh, I just had a student that answered me. Oh, I've been doing. I have been doing. No, what did she say? I'm doing Zumba. I said, perfect. How long have you been doing Zumba for? Why? Because I wanted to introduce the expression for the word for that represents a quantity of time that I hadn't explained until that moment. And I wanted to introduce the question of how long. So I did one that leads to another in a personal way of the student. And what does this represent? It represents that the student will give you meaningful information that has a meaning to him personally, and that new word that he learned for will have a direct connection with his own experience, because she said like 4 months or 5 months, and she got confused for 4 months. No worries, it's 4 months, because there's two different fours. Two, but four is, she even got confused with the numbers after. But no worries, it's a way that we get the student to talking to us, okay? So be very in the teacher's course, we have a technique which is inducing the student. We create the purpose of the student. This way, this is just taking it further. It's taking it to the level of not just him giving me a negative answer by, do you have a Ferrari? And I want him to say, no, I don't have a Ferrari. It kind of, okay, almost no one will have a Ferrari, so that won't be much personal. It won't be very personal. But if you go into his life, if you get him to actually tell you that he doesn't have a car, it might be a lot more personal that he doesn't have a Ferrari. Which is the same grammatical structure, it's the same intonation, but it will be a lot more meaningful communication from the part of the student. Okay, guys? Saying this, we go into defining what is communication. And I know that those are really big words, don't worry about them, just principles, okay? And this definition of communication is not even mine. It was done by he's one of the biggest researchers on English as a second language and communication purpose class method. And the first point that he defined as communication was what I just told you guys, purposelessful. The student should have the intention of giving you an information. They try to get that out of the student, even if it's by inducing the student into using a grammar structure, it's still the purposeful of the conversation, okay? The topic after is reciprocity. So, reciprocity just states that you should have a conversation with the student. The student should say something, and you should say something back to the student. So when the student tells you that she just started doing Zumba, you should take that into account and get involved into that conversation, because that's communicating, that's talking, that's having a proper conversation. So don't think that just by the student using the grammar structure that you wanted, you can just break the conversation there, start a new one, and then after 30 seconds you're going to start a new conversation. You know, communication doesn't work that way. Okay? You should have reciprocity, a constant reciprocity from the teacher. Okay? Also, it should be negotiation between you and the student. And this part is really important because it comes with the correction of the student. We want the student to improve. So they haven't achieved the level that we want them, that's why they're doing the lesson. If they're doing the lesson, they should be corrected. Negotiate that part with the student. Put him in the condition that they will be challenged to use the new vocabulary or the new grammar structure. Get them to use it in a very diplomatic way, using that motherly factor that we talked about before. Correct them. And we have a lot of correction techniques in the book, in our teacher's book, the teacher's manual. We have, for example, alternation. So we have two possibilities. The student made a mistake, you repeat the mistake and you repeat the correct possibility, and let him choose which one he wants to use after. It's a very diplomatic way of doing it. We have the isolation technique. He forgot to use one word. So the student was saying in the beginning of my previous lesson that I work hospital 4 months. I work hospital 1 year. The 4 missing there. And I just used the isolation technique. 4. I just said one word and said, oh yeah, cool. I work in a hospital for 1 year. Well, that's it. See, we have a lot of techniques available to us, but it should be done. You guys shouldn't be afraid of correcting your student. It's a constant negotiation that is a constant part of communicating. Okay? Synchronicity. Okay? is to do with the real-time conversation. So for example, the student is practicing to ask questions. And imagine that it's the how much, how many lesson. And you get him to do a question, chairs. And he goes, how many chairs are there in the classroom? And you take way too long to answer. In his mind, he says, okay, I didn't ask anything then. He just goes, okay, that wasn't the question. Or imagine that he asks you a question and you repeat the question. That's not synchronicity. Because I've never had a proper conversation in any language whatsoever with anyone which is fluent, that was fluent, that he repeated all my questions. I asked and he answered. And this should also be in the classroom, okay? So if the student asks you the most silliest question ever, answer it. And answer it in a pro-efficient way, in an active way, straight away, okay? Use the same vocabulary used. That way, it's a continuous use of vocabulary. Okay, guys? So this is very important. The next point is unpredictability. Unpredictability is just a factor of communicating. We know that if we ask the student, what's your father's occupation? Everyone already had that experience of the student trying to tell you on his first lesson that his father died a long time ago. And you go like, whoa, that. Besides being a very awkward moment, because it's a very personal moment for the student, he's trying to use vocabulary that he hasn't learned yet, and he's feeling awkward because of two reasons. He has to justify something very personal to him, and he has to try to use vocabulary that he wasn't expected to use. But this is communicating. It's part of communicating. Don't consider that a point that would put you in the condition to say, okay, I won't try to do a communication purpose lesson because this might happen. No, it's part of communicating. Okay, it's part of talking. It's not even a negative point. It's just a fact. It will happen, and you can work with it. Okay. Obviously, when it's a fact of a deceased parent, kind of bad to work with that. But if it's any other thing like, which is your favorite soccer team, and the student goes, I don't like soccer. Okay, so which is your favorite sport? Just start the conversation there. And I remember having a lesson with that student that we have with this police officer. Luis.
We have Luis Fernando and
That's
also
it.
Lucas.
Luis. And we're like, so what sport, which soccer team is your favorite team? And we're like, oh, I don't like soccer. Oh, really? So you don't like sports? Oh yes, I like sports, but I like cars. Let's just make the rest of our lesson. I had a full 50-minute lesson about cars because I got his nerve. See the idea? So even when it's unpredictability, it's still something useful. Okay, it brings you something out of us. I told this over and over again in training to most of you that I might not know the name of the student, but I know probably most of his stories. I know most of his life. I know where he works, I know the size of the family, I know what he likes, what he doesn't like, because that's what my lesson is about. I probably might not know his name, because in one day we might have 10, 15 students, different students, and we only see them after like 2 months. But that conversation I remember. Okay guys, so this is the most important part. So the next part is heterogeneity. And this is something that we also need to take into account, which is, for example, you want the student to use I don't have. And you go, okay, you look at the table, he has a Sony Samsung something phone. And you look, okay, do you have iPhone? And you're expecting I don't have. And he looks at you, I don't like iPhones. No. Is that 100% wrong? No. That's communicating. It just gave you an information to start off. See, guys? So even when sometimes the student doesn't continue to use the structure of grammar that you want, he's still not breaking the communication. He still has a level of communication that should be worked with. So don't be too strict about sometimes the structure of grammar you're using on that lesson, because it's for 50 minutes, not every second. Okay? We want the student to focus on, for example, lesson 15, I have done. Lesson 16. Lesson 16, I have done. But if he once in a while he goes into, oh, but I didn't go to that place, if his intention was to use that time to give you that information, it's still correct. The problem is when it's something very important that he has done in his life and he doesn't use the proper structure, then you should correct him. But if he says an 100% correct sentence, communicating with you, covering all the topics and giving you a relevant information in the conversation, still valid. Okay, guys? So that's the balance we should take. Okay? This is a lot of information that will be available to you guys in the new page of your teacher's manual. Okay? Just have a look after. You can watch this video again. It's really important to be able to cover all those topics. Okay? The final part of this course is something very personal to the Speed Up School. And this is what a checklist, a personal checklist you should do before you go into a classroom. And before you get into any classroom at any level, you should ask 3 questions to yourself. And those 3 questions should be answered in accordance to the communication purpose class, because they will help you look at the class in a different way, and they will help you put in practice everything that we just taught you. Okay? And the first one is a very obvious one, which is, what am I teaching? So let's choose the lesson, whatever, lesson
19.
Lesson 19. So what are we teaching on lesson 19?
Present perfect continuous.
Present perfect continuous. And that's a grammar topic. So we keep it that for us. From the 3 questions, the very personal to the teacher is the first one. Present perfect continuous. Because we're not in the English university school, so we don't have to actually manage that. That's not our first goal. We created our goal, but our main goal is not for the student to know the topic, but to use it. So we already have present perfect continuous. Then we go to the second one. Why and when would I use this? And this will give you the context that you use this. Why do we use present perfect continuous? For actions that have started in the past and have continued to the present, they haven't stopped yet. We use present perfect continuous to represent things that have started in the past and continued until the present. So places that we are living at the moment. Activities that we are doing at the moment and we started before. And courses that we have been doing. And series that we have been watching. And places that we have been visiting regularly. When we use it, the why we use it is to represent that. When we normally use it, when we are talking about things that we regularly do, when we normally do, and we constantly do, isn't it? Now, this is what we really give to the student. We just created a replacement for our grammar topic. Present perfect continuous went to things that we do, that we started doing in the past and continue to do into the present. So we just created another name for what we're teaching. And the final one is how to create a context that will make the student use this vocabulary. We go back to the communication purpose class, start our conversation. Where do you live? Oh, I live in Rosalvo. Really? What neighborhood do you live in? Oh, I live in Tobias. Okay, cool. How long have you lived there? Oh, how long have you been living there? Oh, I have been living there for, in my case, 2 months. Oh, cool. So you moved recently? Yes, I moved recently. Okay. Well, why did you move? It's still, I'm still focusing on that, but I'm creating the next step for the next question. Okay. And you go, oh, I used to live in the downtown. Okay, cool. But did you change jobs? No, I didn't change jobs. Oh, cool. So where do you work? I work at Speed Up. How long have you been working there? Every time the student confirms something that he still does or he still has, that's my cue to use vocabulary. Hey guys, this is a very important tool that here at Speed Up we have created and we have developed to assure that you guys are able to really look at the lesson and say, okay, I'm able to teach this way, and that way. And all of this is independent from the audio-visual material that we make available for you guys. We're the kind of school that if the lights go out, we can still open the windows and still give a class. Most important part at Speed Up are the teachers. There's no replacement for that. There is a statistic